welcome to Small Talk, where each week we sit down to discuss the sermon-based small group questions at Wallula Christian Church.
Hello and welcome back to Wallula's weekly podcast, Small Talk. My name is Zach Bolin. I'm student pastor here at Wallula Christian Church, and I'm joined as always by Craig Archer, worship pastor, Lance Kaufman, our lead pastor. We're finally back. It's been 2 weeks for Craig and I, and then Craig and me, and 3 weeks for Lance, who was gone 2 weeks ago. I didn't even ask. Did the class go okay?
Yeah.
You're still passing and it's going well. You were locked in your office for pretty much a week.
Right.
And then do you prefer that than going in person for the weeks that requires you to,
Well, some things I preferred about it, like I didn't have to travel to Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
So I liked that. But it's, those sorts of things I think it's usually better to be in person to hear the professor and to interact with people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, some people are pretty active on the Zoom call and jump in, and I'm just, I'll have that on mute for, and then
you're like eating off screen.
Yeah, you're just kind of hanging out there, and I mean, you have to communicate some, so I don't mean just always, but I'm, a little less likely to chime in.
Sure,
I suppose when it's online.
Yeah.
And so that part of it is a little different. Mm-hmm. And we were, there's a time zone difference, and so it started an hour earlier here than it did in Cincinnati, and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So it was fine though. It was good.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's good to be back. And now we're going over a sermon that was not yours. We're
right.
actually going to be looking at Casey from Westside preached this past Sunday. So we're going to be looking at his sermon, The Overcoming Messiah. And like always, we're going to start with a fun question.
Yeah. We'll make sure we get the things right that Casey messed up. So
shout out to Casey.
Yeah. So no, not at all.
No, it was really good.
Yes.
But this has nothing to do with Casey's sermon, which is the fun question. And it says, how would you describe your favorite meal? Not just one thing you would eat, but it says appetizer, drink, entree, and or dessert. And so we're getting very, very specific. I think we've even had if you were probably stuck on an island, what's the one thing?
Right.
But that's if you had to eat it over and over again. This is just if you had
The ideal meal.
The ideal meal if someone was going to buy you something. Right. What do you have, Craig?
Okay, I'm going to start with a Pepsi.
Okay.
Some drink.
Sure.
And I'm going to go, barbecue is probably my favorite genre of food. But if we're getting in the details here, it'd be like a brisket sandwich.
Okay.
That's my go-to.
There you go.
Most of the time. And there's, people have their favorites. We're in Kansas City, barbecue. Right. But I would even say I'd give a shout out to Barbed Wire Barbecue in Eudora, Kansas.
There you go, Barbed Wire Barbecue.
It's kind of an unassuming location for some really good barbecue, but their brisket, super good.
Okay.
I really like it. Okay. And the thing with barbecue, you got the sides, mac and cheese, cheesy corn, fries. You can mix it up. So that would be my main entree. And then
we were in Waco, Texas this last week.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And we ate at a barbecue place in Waco, famous barbecue place for Waco, I guess. And I ate what they called, they're famous for a meal called a gut pack, which sounds, it sounds like that's.
Sounds like a challenge.
That's what you ought to take. You ought to get that, the gut pack. And the gut pack is kind of like a Frito pie. So it's got Fritos, but then brisket and pinto beans and like cheese and onions. And so anyway, there you go.
Sounds
a little
great.
Brisket on Cheetos. I mean, Fritos.
Brisket on Fritos.
Fritos, yeah.
Was that your answer? Or
no,
I was
just
okay.
Yeah, just sharing.
Man, if you're only going to have one,
a little barbecue.
I get the barbecue thing, but yeah, you'd think if you could have any barbecue, you're not even saying the most expensive, the high-end barbecue restaurants like Q39 or anything. You're saying whatever.
I'm not a huge fan of Q39.
Oh, okay. Well, it doesn't have to be that one. I'm just saying.
Even just, the whole
sit
sit down being waited on.
Right.
doesn't go together for me.
Right, yeah.
I'd rather eat out of a tray that has like the plaid paper on it,
I want to feel fancy.
Right.
A little basket or something.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
And then I'd finish it off with some ice cream.
Of course. Yes, that makes sense.
And
straight vanilla.
Yeah, or whatever's available.
Whatever's available.
It's what you want. So,
I mean, some vanilla ice cream for sure.
That's good.
You're like, just give it to me as long as it's free. Yeah, I was thinking like, okay, favorite meal. I'm pretty laid back too. Like, I'm like, man, I could eat a lot of different things.
That's right.
But if I'm going out to a restaurant and it's like, okay, you're only going to get one thing, and it's, if someone's like, we'll pay for whatever, I'm thinking, well, I think a ribeye, because those are just really expensive and I don't get them very much, and they're always, well, not always good. Most of the time they're always really good, but they're the best cut of meat for me. So anytime I'm like, oh yeah, ribeye would be, yeah, it would be good. As far as the appetizer, this isn't like the most fancy thing, but I never have them and I always love them. But like a bloomin' onion, I love onion rings anyway, and I get a kick out of it. I'm like, oh man, a whole bloomin' onion.
That's right. Let's do it.
It's not the most fancy, but like,
I don't know if I've ever had one of those.
It's so
shout out to Outback.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know the last time I've even been
Do
to
those
Outback.
still exist?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
probably
Do
somewhere.
they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like onion rings. I love onion rings, and so ribeye, onion rings. I don't really, as far as the drink, I don't have a lot of strong preferences. You feel like a wine or something fancy would go with it, but honestly, my favorite drink of all time is like Mountain Dew, which is like, it's so good, and I don't drink it enough. I want to drink it more, but I don't, because it's too bad for me. That's
I
like
love
my
the
favorite.
image of you sitting down to a ribeye and just having like Mountain Dew.
I know, it's like
you said, wine, so I'm picturing
wine
Mountain
is
Dew
paired with this kind of stuff, but I mean, really, I would drink Mountain Dew with anything. And
my dad will order Diet Mountain Dew.
I don't like the taste of that.
And my kids get such a kick out of it.
The diet.
They think that's the funniest thing in the world.
Yeah.
Is here's Grandpa ordering Diet Mountain Dew. So
Yeah.
my dad and Mom and Dad always watch this, by the way. So shout out Mom and Dad. Sorry. But
shout out to Diet Dew.
We can get Diet and regular Dew. We
Yeah.
can do it
There
up.
you go.
Yeah. No, sometimes I'm like, I should be more of an adult and not just want Mountain Dew for everything. But
Right.
You like what you like.
I don't know. Well, I mean, I don't have it at home. There's no way I would drink too much of it. So, anyway, I don't. And then as far as desserts, I mean, I could go any number of ways. Tiramisu, I always like, and it seems like anytime I have one, it's usually at a nicer restaurant. So, and it makes me feel fancy when I say it out loud. So I'm gonna get the tiramisu. Anyway, So basically, ribeye. That's what I would go with for my meal.
Right.
But yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I try to think about, is there some meal when you actually do this where you have an appetizer and we don't do that very much, right? Where you're sitting down to like this 3 or 4 course meal, right?
Yeah,
we don't. That doesn't happen too often in our world, I guess. But so I just strung together random things, and so these don't necessarily go together. Although I would eat them together. I have no qualms about like having this meal.
Sure.
I would be good with that.
Yeah.
That's fine. Appetizers, the first thing, good chips and salsa.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Any chips and salsa, pretty much. So, yeah, I'd go with that. And pizzas, probably, I guess, if I had to pick one favorite.
Of all the food?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
take a gander. I don't turn many things down. So,
Do you have a go-to kind of pizza?
like flavor.
Like toppings and stuff.
Right. I mean, mostly like a combo kind of thing, supreme, whatever they call that, that sort of thing is probably it. Yeah. So growing up, we would almost every Sunday after church, across the highway from the church we attended was a pizza restaurant which was owned by a family and our church, and almost every Sunday we'd go to pizza at this restaurant. It's a chain, Gambino's Pizza. Shout out to Gambino's.
Yeah.
And Gambino's Pizza has they called it a German pie, which when we go there and we'll eat with my mom and dad sometimes, and we get German pie, and it always cracked my kids up. I'm like, what are you doing eating this?
Yeah.
Because it's a pizza with sauerkraut and
I was
Canadian
I was
bacon
wondering
on
if
it.
you were gonna say sauerkraut,
Yeah.
and I was just like, please
Yeah.
don't say it.
And then cheese on top. I don't know. I like it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we would eat that, and my kids are like, what? And Clayton will eat it, and I don't think Lacey or Zoe has ever tried it. Maybe Lacey has, but Zoe doesn't. Not into that.
I've never had sauerkraut.
You've never had sauerkraut?
Never even tasted it.
Huh.
I mean,
Really?
yeah.
We'll have to have some brats and sauerkraut or something.
I'm okay with that. I like to try things even if
Yeah.
I'm like 99% sure I'm not going to like it. I'm always the one who's like, we got to try it though.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I
Right.
like to do things.
If you like pickled things, it's pickled cabbage,
I don't.
right?
Mhm.
So
I don't like
you
that,
know.
but yeah, I'll
don't
try
like
it.
that?
I know enough people eat it. I'm like, maybe there's something to it, like on a brat. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway,
So there you go.
There
And
you go.
dessert, my favorite pie
Oh, yeah.
of all time is a gooseberry pie. Not many people
never had that either.
have gooseberry pie. I don't
I
have
didn't know
it
that
very
was an
often.
actual berry.
No, my mom used to bake gooseberry pies on occasion growing up. And
Shout out to mom.
shout out to mom.
There you go. She's
So,
watching.
Yeah, if she loved me, she'd probably make me a gooseberry pie once in a while.
August is
but
around the corner
She
for
doesn't
your
really
birthday.
do that.
Yeah.
So since mom and dad are listening,
Easter's coming up. You can make it an
gooseberry
Easter
pie,
present.
That'd be great, but
And
whatever.
actually, Lance's,
she'll be so mad.
Lance's
about
mom.
this, by the way.
Lance's
Gonna
mom.
get a phone call?
Oh, yeah.
I've never had
She'll be so
gooseberry
mad.
pie, so even another reason.
I haven't either.
We both have never had it. I didn't know it was an actual berry, so I would just like to try it. So if you wanted to, you got 3 people who would
Right.
for sure.
She's gonna be super angry about this.
Is
Zach.
she?
You
Why?
can- she'll be like,
I'm-
"Why are you talking about me? Do not talk about me."
I'm excited about this pie.
promise
I'm going to
you.
throw it out there.
I promise you, I'm getting that conversation.
into the podcast sphere and see what happens.
Yeah.
All right. That's funny. All right. We are moving on. So, yeah, we're looking at Casey's sermon, The Overcoming Messiah. And we're going to be combining the first question is going to be 5 and 6 together.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes like this. What do you think the disciples were feeling as they saw the armed mob approaching? This is when Jesus was praying in the garden and Judas goes to betray him. And then number 6 says, what do you think was going through the other disciples' minds as they watched the soldiers tie Jesus' hands behind his back? So we get this image of Judas betraying Jesus, the soldiers coming to arrest him, and now everyone who's standing around his disciples are seeing this happen. What's going through their minds at that moment? We think about a lot from Jesus' perspective, but for everyone else, what do you think, Craig?
Yeah, this was an interesting thought. Like you said, I haven't really tried to put myself in the shoes of the disciples
Right.
in this moment as much. And like, it's not just one of them, because we know what Peter's reaction
Right.
is,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot others to like think about. Probably a wide array of reactions and thoughts going on.
Sure.
And you think about leading up to it, like they spent such concentrated time with Jesus, and he kept saying, like the kingdom of God is near, and he's gonna conquer and all this stuff. And so, like, what are they thinking that this is gonna be like?
Right.
Like, some people thought like overthrowing the government in some sort of
Right.
way, ruling over like earthly rulers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what their picture exactly of that would look like.
Mm-hmm.
But then they're following him around for 3 years, and then all of a sudden people are coming to arrest him and take him away.
Right.
And so there's obviously a lot of confusion and the what ifs and what should I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine just in that moment the thoughts swirling around in their head.
Yeah.
And so a couple things, for instance, like I said, Peter, drawing the sword and using that physical resistance against them, it's almost as if he kind of forgot who Jesus was in that moment. Like this guy that you've been following around,
Right.
witnessing these miracles, all the things that he said, and even like, blessed are the peacemakers. And then all of a sudden Peter's like, I'm going to get my sword out and I'm going to do
Make
this
some
for
peace.
you. Yeah. And
Cut off a piece of
yeah.
his ear.
right. and yeah, I mean, and Jesus addresses that a little bit too. He's like, don't you realize who I am? I could have called on thousands of angels to come rescue. And
Right,
like
right.
in his his oneness with God the Father. Like, you're talking about Jesus, the Son of God here, and Peter's like, watch this. I'm going to handle this situation.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of that, like in the moment of that chaos, forgetting who Jesus was and wanting to take that into their own hands. And yeah, I just kind of like a misunderstanding of what was going on, I think. Jesus was very confident in the moment, like knowing that this is the will of God.
Right.
And this had to be done to fulfill the scriptures.
Yeah.
This was part of God's plan. And so, like, we see that tension where he's like, made this cut pass, but he's submitting himself over to God. And so, he willingly is like going through this, knowing the plan. And it's interesting too, like even Judas in that moment still calls him rabbi, you know, like calling him teacher. And I think there's a lot to unpack right there. As he betrays him, still calls him rabbi. And so there's like, I don't know, just a lot going on with, he is rabbi, teacher to them. He is the Son of God, but they kind of forget. And just a lot of chaos. If you think about that moment, people storming in and kind of trying to like take handle of Jesus, like, what would the reactions be? Like their minds would jump to so many conclusions or reactions.
Yeah. Well, and like his life had been in danger multiple times up to that point. We'd read where they were looking for opportunities to kill him, but this was the first time it really was all coming to a head. And so, what were they thinking as what was going through their minds? And I just said they were freaking out. Because now it's becoming a reality and things are starting to go downhill. And from Casey's message, where one of the things I really liked is that he said at the very beginning was that we fight to avoid suffering. And I thought he did a good job of unpacking that, basically trying to get our own way and protect ourselves. But, like if you think about it from their perspective, they've slowly grown in their faith and trust and hope in Jesus. And they've seen him prove himself over and over again to the point where we're totally convinced he was the Messiah. He was the one who was fulfilling the Old Testament. He was the new Moses, who was this liberator and lawgiver, as he was tweaking the Old Testament laws even. You've heard that it was said, but I say, and that he was a new David, and like all the things that they had been hoping for thousands of years as a people. They believed were in Jesus, and now he's getting arrested, about to be crucified. And they're like, wait. And so you see these guys who are kind of all over the place, really just not knowing how to handle it. Some, like you said, with Peter, just taking a sword and swinging, trying to, is it Malchus? I think this is his name. But he cuts off the ear of Malchus, the high priest's servant, and Jesus heals it, which is a good thing, because now, I mean, even up to that point, you could argue that he could have been assaulted or arrested for assault, but now there's no longer any evidence. So with what happened to Peter, he kind of got away with possibly, him actually being in trouble. But for both Jesus and the disciples, like suffering isn't the hard part, but it's suffering alone. And now they are both going to be, we think about it from Jesus' perspective, how hard that was, like suffering alone. But they are also in the same boat because they've put all their hope into Jesus, and he's going to be crucified, and they are like, all their hope is gone, and they're alone. Everything they thought was going to happen is now not. Now we know, hindsight being 2020, that he's going to come back, but they didn't. And so just the despair, the angst, what do we do? Try to fix everything. And so it's a really scary time to just watch in slow motion everything go down right in front of you and do nothing to stop it. And then slowly throughout the rest of that day, watch, when he goes to the cross, how hard that must be. But anyway, it's an interesting thing. You always think about it from Jesus' perspective, but what must it have been like to just be a disciple watching not just someone you love, but the person that you thought was the key figure, the Messiah.
He says, "Come follow me," and then all of a sudden,
and then now they're questioning probably themselves and like, well, now Anyway, yeah.
It's interesting to think about the disciples and that crowd of, who's with him. Is it 11 other guys? Is more people than that or whatever? And but at least 11 with him, right? Jesus there, and then the crowd. I just looked, and in the gospel accounts, the ESV uses in each one of these the word crowd, a couple times, in a band of soldiers coming with the Judas and the religious leaders, and so I read one scholar who said it was up to 600 soldiers with him, right? And so I didn't go back and look at the original language to, so I don't know what Greek word was being translated there, but maybe there were 600 soldiers or this group of folks with clubs and swords, some of the Gospels record for us, and so they are coming armed to the teeth. And I also read one scholar who said there were 3 swords among the disciples, and I don't know where they get that from, because Peter draws the one, and I went and looked at all 4 of the gospel accounts, and that's all unless I missed something, right. That's what talks about in each one, is this one sword drawn. But and so, man, these odds are not good, I guess. And you wonder what they're thinking. And man, fear has to be present there, right? But I also, I wonder if they thought, this is our, to kind of put it in American history vernacular, right? This is our Pearl Harbor moment. You study the beginning of World War II, and at the beginning of World War II, this war is going on in Europe or whatever, and the United States doesn't want any part of it, mostly. Now, the government, the United States leaders, FDR and Congress, they start saying, okay, we're going to send money and we're going to send weapons, and they start doing that, sending that to Britain. But the American people are like, well, this isn't our war. They mostly want to stay out of it. And then you get Pearl Harbor. Right, and now we have to do something. And I wonder if the disciples are sitting there thinking, who have kind of been rooting for this, right? This political takeover, and they see this crowd of soldiers coming at Jesus. Now this is it. This is our. They didn't say Pearl Harbor, but you get the point. This is our moment. Yeah. This is going to.
We know Jesus can do miracles.
Yeah, this is going to force Jesus' hand. Right, and there are scholars who say, in fact, that this is the motivation of Judas. Yeah, that Judas is coming and betraying him. We put a black hat on Judas, and rightly so. All those things, I don't know, but there's scholars who say, well, Judas is just trying to force Jesus' hand, into
make a move,
to be Messiah, to come in victorious, and so, if you want to kind of play that conspiracy card here, then you could, and maybe that's what he's thinking. Maybe that's what the crowd's thinking, or the disciples with Jesus. They're thinking, okay, now here's our moment. And in fact, John chapter 18 tells this story, and if you remember John's account, Jesus initiates the conversation with Judas and the crowd, that group of soldiers. He said, "Who are you looking for?" And they said, Jesus. He said, I'm he. And if you remember, when he has this conversation, that crowd of soldiers, maybe 600 strong, with clubs and torches and swords, armed to the teeth. They have the numerical and armored advantage in this standoff, this conflict, but they fall back. They fall to the ground at the words of Jesus. And it's sort of like, okay, well, all these disciples, these 11 disciples who have to be scared, they're afraid of what's going to happen. But then Jesus speaks, and this army falls to the ground. And there's got to be a moment where they go, this is it. Yeah. Right? Yeah. I mean, we accuse Peter of being, this is Peter. He jumps out of the boat. He speaks up, first one to speak, and here he draws his sword. But, I mean, these guys have just fell to the ground in fear of Jesus. Hey, I'm the one you're looking for. And then they fall to the ground, and I don't know, I might be inclined to draw my sword too, right? I'll jump in on this. Yeah, maybe it's not so crazy to think this one guy with one sword. Who knows? I mean, he's seen him do it with fish.
Well, and even if you know the Old Testament, you see this all the time where the Israelites who are so outnumbered, because God is with them.
Yeah, we'll hold up Moses' arms and here we go. Yeah. We'll jump in here. And so, I just wonder if there's a little bit of that going through their heads. And of course, that's not who Jesus is as Messiah. And he kind of corrects that even in the moment. And that fear definitely settles in then, right? And so, and I don't know what the disciples are feeling, but you have to think, well, Jesus felt completely abandoned, right? Because everybody after that abandons him. He's been abandoned by the government, right? He's a enemy of the government of the Roman Empire. The religious leaders have turned their back on him. They've abandoned him, and then all of his friends. Yeah, starting with Judas. Yeah. But then every single one of the disciples. Yeah.
Well, and then the crowd too that had welcomed him a week earlier.
Right.
The religious leaders got them turned, and so.
Well, Mark's account, right? We read about this teenager who was probably Mark, who takes off running, and they reach out to grab him and grab hold of his shirt, and he keeps going, and they're left just with his, with his clothes, and so he runs away naked, and
just to get away from
just everybody, and so everybody abandons him. We're not even sticking around to make sure I have my undies. We're out of here,
right? And
so everybody leaves Jesus, and just an amazing. So I'm not sure. I probably a flood of emotions for his disciples, but Jesus has to feel abandoned, and there's this resolve in Jesus. Casey on Sunday talked about, we shouldn't overlook the cup. At one point, talking about the, Jesus in the garden just before this, and he said, this cup can pass, then let's do that, but I'll drink it if that's what you want me to do. And I read a while ago this communion meditation by Jack Cottrell, and he talks about like this coffee cup. It has our podcast name on it, Small Talk. I don't have any coffee cups with Lance on it, your personalized cup or whatever, but maybe you have one of those.
World's best boss.
Yes, whatever it is, right? Whatever. Nobody's brought me one of those guys, but whatever it is. But you think, this is my cup,
right?
And you drink out of that, and Jesus, his name wasn't on that cup. When you think about why does he have to drink it? Well, he has to drink it because of your sin and your sin, my sin. Right, for all the sin of everybody who's just turned their back on him and just run away from him, and yet Jesus still drinks that cup. We shouldn't forget that cup, and what Jesus took.
Well, and that's a good lead into the next question, because in number 7, it says, when we are tempted to take matters into our own hands when are we tempted to take matters into our own hands out of devotion to God? We see the disciples in the garden. Peter's just the easiest example, but taking the sword and trying to fix the situation because he wants to protect Jesus, not realizing he's making it worse, and contrasting that with Jesus, who is willingly taking on, is submitting himself, not trying to exert his own power, but instead drinking the cup. And so even today, though, we struggle with this, going back to Casey's sermon, we fight to avoid suffering. And so, in today's world, we as Christians, maybe we're known more for fighting than for submitting, than for showing love. And so the practical side of this question is, when are we tempted to maybe fight or take matters in our own hands when it comes to serving God? Maybe if it's not the best thing, but we think we're doing the right thing. And what do you have, Craig?
Well, my mind just goes right towards, and it's similar to how we've described to the disciples a little bit. If you're in a season of kind of feeling confused or waiting for something, that's a really easy time for you to, and I've experienced this, you kind of pull back on trusting God for things. And I'm even like, this was like 6-7 years ago, when I was working towards like really feeling a pull into ministry, and I was coming from the education world, and I had like a couple part-time jobs, one of them being Campus Christians at KU, and so I was really looking for like a full-time position, and it took a really long time for that to show up and be a thing in our lives. And so, you know, I would get to a point where I'm like, I just need to like work harder at putting in these applications and connecting with people and putting like all of this effort into this thing that I wanted, and I felt like God put on me to like really desire.
Right.
And then I realized I got to a point where I was like really trying to like force it so hard and put it all on myself instead of looking to God to open up a path or open up a door, an opportunity. And I think that's a really easy time, like when we're waiting for something, where we're just think, I got to take care of this. I have to do something about this, you know. And I think about Abraham and Sarah in the Old Testament, where God says, like, I promise that I'm going to do this for you and provide a child. And then they're like, he's not doing anything, so we're going to do something about this.
Yeah.
And eventually he does, in his timing, provide that child for them.
Yeah.
And so it's not just us, but throughout human history,
Right.
we try to fix things, and
Right.
we think we know what's better than God's timing. And I think too, I was reminded of the verse I used for communion on Sunday in Galatians 2:21, where Paul says, like, we can't earn our salvation through our works. Our right standing before God is not based on just the things that we do, or else if that were true, then Christ died for no reason.
Right.
And I think too, we can get in our heads about that and try to check boxes and do the right thing in order to like make ourselves feel good about our standing before God.
Right.
And that really confuses us, and that's something that we shouldn't work towards, because Paul says like that's like, it's like meaningless, because Christ died for a reason. Like he says, it was a necessary death for our salvation.
Right.
And so when we get into a place where we're like, oh, I need to do this, whatever it might be, like works-based or like, absolutely we should be studying the Bible and praying. But when it becomes like a thing where God will be more pleased if I just do this, that's a point when we're tempted to get into a rut of like, the more I do, the better off I'll be.
Right.
And that's not true, because that just
motives in the wrong place.
Yeah, that just takes away our trust and our faith in God providing things in a season, or providing this gift of salvation through Jesus. So
yeah, no, so trying to think of the, like, you know, the practical side, and the first thing that came to me was raising children. And I said, I just thought, like, you know, there's a balance between raising our children to know God, and then reacting with fear when they're not going the way that we want. You know, like, I need you to do this because this is what God wants, and I don't want you to turn out like everyone else. And so, at the core, we're taking matters in our own hands instead of trusting in God. You know, that all I can do is, you know, point to Jesus in my own life and the way I live. But I've known parents, I mean, when I was at Ozark at Bible college, I had some friends there who were like, oh yeah, my parents told me I had to come here. And it was like their last ditch effort, because the kid had been not great all throughout. And they're thinking, hopefully
Bible college,
that'll fix it. Right.
Yeah.
They're trying out of fear, like, cause what if my kid, you know, doesn't, you know, go the way we want. And so they forced them to go to college. Years ago, we were going to move, and there was a kid who was dropped off and had no idea they were going to move the high school conference. And then they're like, what are we doing here? And then the parent just pulled out a suitcase. There was a giant argument in the parking lot that they didn't know they were going on this trip. And the parent was, because the kid didn't want to go. And they were like, okay, fine. And then they just sort of, but you know, that's not a healthy balance of doing it that way. Now, the kid ended up loving the trip and all this stuff. But I think there was a sort of, as a parent, a fear-based, like, you know, I got to do anything I can. Right. And then, you know, in the same way, if if a kid is just very honest about the questions they have, like, how do we know this is even true? Sometimes it can be hard for parents to not freak out and be like, oh,
Right.
and like, don't ask those questions. And so, anyway, so one of the things I had was just, raising children. We want them to know God so badly that we try to force things or, stifle things that
that's really good.
It may not, it can do more damage. The second thing is when you're going through hard times, I was thinking, like for myself, just having gone through a divorce about 6 months ago, there's a temptation to try to control things, about like, oh, as a pastor, like, what's the image going to be? And one of the verses that really has just stood out to me is, and this really applies to anytime we're going through something that's difficult, is in Galatians 1:10, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I'm still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. And just sometimes the best thing I can do, not just for my situation, but anyone who's going through something hard, is just to lean into God and not put the worries of other people on yourself. And so we get caught up in our own image, and it could be and whatever that is, however you want to view other people. So not from someone from another denomination or non-Christians and Christians or whatever, we could want so badly to present ourselves in a good way. And it's like, when I put a post on Facebook, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Right. And so where's the attention going? And so going back to the heart of what are my motives for doing things or not doing things? And that brought me, so that's like, if you're going through hard times, that's one. And then the last one I had was just worldly control. Anything that's outside of ourselves, we try to control a lot. So politics, we try to, as a Christian, we should be doing this and changing everything. Or with other denominations, we're right, they're not, and we can kind of try to overly control that. With global crisis or whatever, things that are just way outside our control, we try to take matters into our own hands, I think.
Right.
And so, I'm reminded, to wrap all this up, just Jesus in the garden, who was about to give up all this control. And the main thing he did was, before it all went down, was he was praying, not my will, but your will. And it wasn't about him.
Right.
It wasn't about it being fair, because it wasn't fair. And so the idea that, we need to be, it should be right for us, and there should be nothing wrong happen to us, and it should be fair. And it's like, dude, we are not guaranteed any of that. Right. All we can do is stay faithful to God, no matter what happens. And following Jesus's prayer, but not my will, but your will be done. And so if it's about me, then that's where we start to, it starts to go off track. But anyway, so those are my three answers for that. What about, just to reiterate, when are we tempted to take matters into our own hands?
Right. Well, the first thing that came to my mind when I was thinking about this, and it's, the Kansas presidential primary today.
It's today, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not looking forward to this fall, and because sometimes we can put so much hope and concern and worry into, who's elected and who's in charge and who are we going to support and, who are we voting for, and wish there was somebody better to vote for, and all those things. And man, we just think, oh, we've got to control this and figure it out. And sort of like the disciples, right? He said, oh, they're hoping Jesus will be that political leader or whatever, and we already have a king. We're already members of a kingdom. He's already won. There's no reason to worry about any of that. And I'm not saying don't vote or anything like that. I think you ought to, and all those things. But we can't. We're not going to fix it on our own. No matter who's elected to that position, we could, we could have elected Billy Graham or whatever.
Right.
It's not making a difference.
Right.
It's not going to fix everything. Right. I mean, certainly one person or another might make a difference, but we're not going to fix everything in the world outside of the world having a relationship with Jesus, and outside of Jesus coming back, and Eden restored is going to fix everything.
Right.
But I just think, why why do we put ourselves in that position? And to me, I go back to this story, and you backtrack a little bit before the betrayal, and where are Jesus and the disciples? They're in the garden praying. You guys have talked about that, and if you remember that story, what happens? Well, Jesus says, "Okay, pray for me," and he goes off, and he comes back, and he finds them sleeping. Yeah. And I just thought, there was one party who was prepared spiritually for this not physical battle, right, but this spiritual warfare, right? This spiritual battle, and it was Jesus and his disciples, these guys who have that flood of emotions, who are going from maybe, this is the moment, this is our chance, to fear, to just freaking out and running. Man, they're not prepared. It seems so simple, right? But they are not prayed up at all. Right. They're not prepared for the spiritual battle. And when all these things, whatever the situation is, is it parenting, or is it politics, or whatever it is, right? That might cause us fear, and we worry about. We have to ask ourselves the question: Are we prayed up? Right. Are we prepared spiritually for this spiritual conflict? And just trust. The disciples experienced this flood of emotions, and what I hear what you guys are saying. I think we maybe need to choose words carefully, because I don't mean to contradict you guys. We're going to use the same terminology here, because Jesus is submitting to the will of the Father. And so, I think both of you guys have said, well, he gave up his control, right? Except he was really in control of this whole thing, and so on one hand, he gave up his control. He's submitting to the Father. This is the plan, right? And sometimes, submitting to the Father, and it's his plan too, right? Right. And so he's in control of this whole thing. Like, he announces, hey, who are you looking for? I'm that guy. Come get me. Right. Kind of holds his hands out, and Judas, you go ahead. What did you come to do? Go ahead. Here's my cheek. Right. Go ahead. You come do this. The army falls down, and he's got to wait for them to get up and come do this stuff. Right. I mean, what a moment! If you think you have the power to just say a word, and then 600 soldiers fall to the ground. I mean, that's a pretty good time to yell retreat. Right. If you're going to leave, if you're going to take control of the situation, and so he controls the situation through submission. Right, through submitting to.
But he still has the power.
Yeah, he could have
at any time called angels.
At any point, in fact, one of the accounts says that. He says, "Right, put your sword away. Right, don't you think I could have, handled this differently?" And so he's in charge, and I know maybe sometimes, that almost comes across as trite, but if it does, it's because it's true. It's based in truth. That Jesus is in control, even when we're worried about how our kids are behaving or walking away from the faith, even, or we're worried about the direction of the country, or any of these things, or what am I supposed to be doing for God? Why isn't this working out on my timing? Right. We've been praying for a kid and trying to have a kid, and why isn't this working out in our timing? I need this new job. I think I'm called into ministry. Why isn't this working out on my timing? Well, Jesus is in control. I don't have answers for that. Those are hard. I'm not smart enough to figure it out. Right. I don't know. Right. I don't know, but I do know that Jesus is completely in control. He's sovereign. He is God, and it's one of the lessons here from this story is that, man, he was prepared for this battle. He is prepared for this battle, even when we are not. Right. And so we can lean on him, and maybe we ought to get a little more prepared for it. So
yeah, no, I think it's really good. And also, in the same way that we're reading this story, and like with 20/20 vision here, and recognizing, oh, if they just had trusted in Jesus,
Right,
it would all work out. And we are in the same way when we're in the middle of an election, and it's like 20 years from now, 40 years from now, if we could just look back on ourselves and be like, you're fine.
For sure.
And so we know this, we know it now, the same way when I was in, elementary school freaking out about nothing. Right. And then I can look back and think it's fine. I still need to hear those same words that, just keep following Jesus, keep doing that. Even when it doesn't feel like it. Yeah. This is still the best way. He's still in control.
Yeah.
And
another thing too, on top of that, I think we talked about it a few weeks ago, but not only just the leaning on him and trusting and following, but like you said, we don't have answers for all of those things.
Right.
But we do know that Jesus suffered and suffers along with us. And we have the promise of he's with us until the end of the age.
Yeah.
So he's in the midst of those things too.
Yeah.
And that provides some encouragement, comfort along the way too.
Yeah. 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 There were some people who fled the scene here. Jesus wasn't one of them.
Right.
Right. When, he could have disappeared.
Yeah.
He could have took off.
Yeah. Really good. And like I said, I liked the approach that the questions had us go, thinking about it from the disciples' perspective, and really appreciated Casey's take on it as well. And so glad you guys are with us. We will be back again next week, continuing on with this series. And we'll see you then.
Right.